I've had the Red Komodo X for about a year now, and although I haven't shot as much diverse content on the Red that I had on previous cameras, that was to be expected, because I shifted my content to higher budget projects as well as narrative work, so there wasn't as much to shoot as previously when I was shooting a lot of ad campaigns for social media and smaller companies. So in this video, which is sponsored by Skillshare, but I will talk about this later, I want to give you my experience dealing with the Red Komodo X over the past year and the switch from all my Canon cameras to the Red, and if I regretted it, what I like about this camera, there's certain things that I don't like about the camera, and also my future with the Red Komodo X. Let's first start talking about the physical attributes of the Red Komodo X, the body and the design. The body of the Red Komodo X is pretty small for its capabilities, and this is probably the one thing that I love most about the camera. Its modularity and therefore its versatility. If you strip it down without any accessories, you can mount it to a car, you can put it in a fridge, or you can mount it for a top-down shot easily without having to have anything that you don't need. And that also goes for jobs where you don't need external audio, or you don't need an external monitor, you don't need a shoulder rig, you don't need a lot of bells and whistles. So you can really make this camera your own and just customize it for whatever job you need. I love the fact that the Red Komodo X now has a built-in V-mount battery support, because I run all of my cameras with V-mount support, and therefore I can just slap a V-mount battery on the back of the camera and just call it a day. Granted, having this modular design, it basically needs to be rigged out in order to be used. But the good thing about the Red camera is that it's made for rigging. Whereas other cameras that also need a certain amount of rigging, like a Blackmagic Pocket 6K for example, they're not really made for rigging. So it's always a little awkward, and you need third-party accessories and cages that don't 100% fit all the time. Whereas the Red Komodo X was built with rigging in mind. So third-party manufacturers have an easy time just making accessories that you can attach to the camera, because the camera itself already has a lot of mounting points. You can rig the camera out for a really small handheld build, but you can also go as big as you like, and for multiple crew work on a big narrative shoot, you can just attach as many accessories as you need. And if you're interested about my rigs, I have one small handheld rig as well as one full cine rig and even a gimbal rig set up on my YouTube channel, and I will link them all down in the description below. When it comes to the ports of the camera, there's hardly anything I miss. I would probably like another SDI port, but if you're using the original Red 7-inch monitor, you can actually use this via the USB-C port, and then it frees up the SDI port for wireless transmission to a first AC or a DirectX monitor. And that also makes for a very clean setup, because the Red 7-inch monitor not only is being powered via one USB-C cable, but the same USB-C cable also transmits the video feed, and therefore you only have one cable. I personally thought that the Red 7-inch was a little bit too pricey, so I opted for the Portkeys BM7 II, and I love this monitor, and it also has camera control, but I will talk about this in a later section of the video. The camera now features way better preamps, and it has an audio port, so we can actually attach XLR ports to it, so everything we need for audio is built into the camera. And the good thing is it's modular, so it keeps the build small, because if we don't need XLR audio, which a lot of the times I don't have to have a big clunky body, because I don't need the audio ports. But when I need them, I can just attach them. And this goes for a lot of the ports, because we have the universal external port, which we can then use to add expander units to it, so that we have all the ports that we need. We also have a lot of buttons that we can customize, which makes shooting with this camera even easier. I also love the locking RF mount. Not only that it is locking, because that was a big problem on the original Red Komodo, because you had a lot of play in the RF mount, but that it is an RF mount in general. Because although I hardly use any RF lenses, I can easily adapt it to PL and EF mounts. So to sum it up, I really love the body of the Red Komodo X. There's only one thing that I'm really missing on that camera body, and that is internal ND filters. So let's talk about those for a second. Coming from cameras in the past that always had internal ND filters, all the way back when I was shooting on the Canon C200, over the C300 Mark III and the Canon C70s, it's something I really do miss. There's a lot of great options for the Red Komodo X when it comes to ND filters, but working with them is always kind of a pain, because there isn't a one-for-all solution. A lot of the times I'm working with a matte box in front of my lenses, and that is great because it's versatile. I can stack different filters, I can use a variable ND filters, I can use solid ND filters, so overall this is a great solution. The downside of it is it's pretty pricey because all these filters cost a lot, especially when they get bigger. The other downside of it is that it is actually pretty big and heavy. So if you want to balance this on a smaller gimbal, you're probably out of luck because those filters weigh a lot and they just weigh down the camera too much for it to actually balance on a small gimbal. The third downside of this setup is it can be pretty slow, especially if you're working with rectangular ND filters. Then you need to just switch them out one by one, and then there's also the problem of where to put them. And if you're in an outside environment where it's pretty dusty, etc., then it slows you down a lot, especially if you have to figure out which kind of stop you need, and then you need to switch the glass. It's just not great. There's also the option of using an ND filter in the lens mount adapter, which is also an option that I'm using as I have the Kipper-type revolver system. And that is also really great because you get high quality, solid ND filters, and it's very easy and quick to use. The problem with that option is that you're kind of limited to a certain lens mount. For example, if you want to shoot on RF glass, you can't use any adapter at all because you don't need an adapter. The other problem is that it either works for PL or EF, so if you want to have both, you need two different adapters, which again is really pricey, and you need to switch the adapters if you want to switch lenses, which actually isn't the worst thing in the world, but it doesn't work with all the lenses. There's a lot of PL mount lenses that have a protruding element in the back, like the Nisi Athenas, for example, or even I think some anamorphic lenses. So even though we have this rear filter system, we can't use it with all of our lenses. Then of course there's also the old tried and true method of just using a screw-on filter in front of your lens, but that also has some downsides. You also need to unscrew it and screw it back onto the next lens. There is a lot of cine lenses that don't even have any filter thread at all, or there is various filters thread sizes like 86 millimeters on one of my cine lenses, then you have 95 millimeters or 77 millimeters. So you need to work with adapters. And there's also the downside of image quality because a lot of them don't have the best image quality and they have some color shift. And if you're shooting wide angle and you have a filter that is directly attached to your lens, you often run into vignetting issues. So as you can see, it's pretty complicated, but there is a solution for every problem. But if you're shooting on versatile lenses and versatile situations, you will need to have a lot of solutions for a lot of problems. So here I really wish the camera had internal ND filters, and that would make the camera so much better in my opinion. Again, if you're shooting bigger narrative projects with a big crew and you have a lot of time, then this isn't really an issue and you can just use a matte box with solid ND filters and get the highest quality possible. Speaking of narrative work, as I've mentioned in the beginning, I want to venture more into making short films, maybe even a TV series or a feature film one day. But screenwriting is something that I'm not the best at yet. So I want to brush up on my skills. And one platform that really helps me is Skillshare. I've been learning on Skillshare for quite some time now. When I became serious about doing YouTube, I took some classes by a guy named Ali Abdal, and this helped structuring my YouTube channel's content as well as just boosting my productivity by a lot. And now that I want to get into screenwriting and just level up my creative writing in general, there's tons of different classes on Skillshare that I can use to just enhance my storytelling. And the good thing is they also have paths to learning. So once you start a path where you want to improve on one skill, they suggest more and more courses for you. And on Skillshare, there's thousands of creative classes from instructors from all over the world and leading experts in all kinds of different fields. So no matter the skill you want to improve on, Skillshare has you covered. This could be storytelling or lighting, boosting your productivity, or just learning how to structure your business better. The first 500 people to use my link in the description below get one full free trial month of Skillshare. So get started right now. Next up, let's talk about the autofocus. And I've had a different experience with the autofocus on the Red Komodo X than some people on Facebook or YouTube. Because a lot of people claim that the autofocus is really usable and it's great and they use it all the time, whereas I just couldn't make it work for me at all. I've tried different lens adapters, mostly with EF glass, Canon lenses, as well as Sigma Art lenses. And no matter what I tried to focus on, it was just less than satisfactory. I've actually tried using it in a situation like this, where I'm just sitting still on a desk with a great lighting, me being separated from the background, and just trying to focus on me while recording a talking head. but even that didn't work. Either it didn't find my face or it didn't find the focus, or the focus was slightly off. It was on my ears or on my neck instead of my eyes. Granted, I'm shooting wide open all the time. I'm recording this video at an aperture of 1.4 right now to just have a little bit more separation to the background. And I've tried this with my Sigma Art lenses and also with my Canon lenses, and it never really worked. Sometimes it looked like I was in focus and I couldn't hear the autofocus. I could tell on the monitor that the square was green, so I thought I was in focus. I recorded an entire YouTube video, then I brought it back into post and I could see the focus hunting ever so slightly the entire time, so I couldn't use it. I had to scratch it and re-record it with my Canon camera. So overall, I would never rely on the autofocus of the Red Komodo X, especially not for important client work or a bigger project. So I'm treating the Red Komodo X like it just didn't have autofocus at all. So now let's talk about the image quality. And this is where the camera shines. The 6K sensor produces a really nice sharp image. Coming from the Canon C70 that I have used for the longest time, this is a major improvement. And the great thing is now I can use more vintage lenses or lenses that aren't as sharp, and I can always shoot wide open even if the lens is a bit softer, but the 6K will actually take care of it. Whereas with the Canon C70, if you paired a soft lens with a soft sensor, it just looked absolutely horrible and muddy afterwards. Sometimes I even feel like the 6K looks a bit too sharp, but then again I'd rather start off with a really sharp image that I can then diffuse with mist filters, for example, or again by shooting wide open on older vintage lenses, or with the new Blazar anamorphic lenses that I've been trying out lately. They look absolutely amazing and they are tech sharp in combination with the 6K sensor. So here this is absolutely amazing. To be fair though, in the beginning when I switched from my Canon cameras to the Red Komodo X, I couldn't really see what all the fuss was about because I couldn't really tell that big of a difference in image quality. But that was because we were shooting mostly in controlled environments. We were shooting narrative projects, sometimes in a studio, so we brought in our own lights. And honestly, if you have a great set design and you have great lighting, you can make almost every camera work and look pretty much the same. But once I took this camera out in the field in an environment that I couldn't 100% control, this is where I saw the difference. I had a commercial job a month ago where we were shooting outdoors during the day in difficult situations, backlit, etc, etc. Mostly we didn't have the time to bring in big lights and stage every scene. We were also working with small kids, so we didn't really have that much time. So here we were mostly shooting with available light and maybe one diffuser and one light source. And here I was absolutely blown away by the capabilities of the Red Komodo X's sensor. Most of the times I just expose according to the traffic light system. If nothing is blown out in the highlights and nothing is crushed in the shadows, I just hit the record button. Then when I brought it back into post, everything looked kinda meh and overexposed. So I brought it back down in post-production and I was absolutely blown away by the options I had. I had all the informations in the highlights and all the information still in the shadows, and I had such a latitude that I've never experienced on any other camera before. The flexibility that Red RAW gives me is something that I never want to miss again. Furthermore, one reason why I upgraded from the original Red Komodo to the Red Komodo X was its slow motion capabilities. Funnily enough, in the year that I've actually had the Red Komodo X, I never really had to shoot anything above 50 frames. Last week in Croatia, when testing out the new anamorphic lenses, I actually decided to shoot everything in 80 frames just to test it out. And the image looks absolutely gorgeous. Maybe there are some projects where you need to go above 100 frames or 120 frames. It's also sometimes a bit annoying that you can't shoot the full width of the sensor in 17:9 and you have to crop it down to a 2.4:1 in order to achieve these higher frame rates. But like I said, I've been shooting on the Red Komodo for about a year now. The 40 frames on the original Red Komodo was not enough for me. Now I'm shooting everything in 50, 60, sometimes 75, and that is plenty and I love it. So overall, when it comes to image quality, I want to say that the Red Komodo X is probably the best image quality that I have ever had on any camera that I owned, but it does come at a price, and that is file sizes. Even on the highest compression codec, which is the ELQ setting, it still produces about 4 times as big of a file than it does on a Canon C70 or a Sony FX6 or any other mirrorless camera. And that adds up quickly. Granted, I mostly shoot everything in ELQ and LQ. ELQ for these talking head setups, and everything else is basically LQ because the projects that I'm shooting don't really need MQ or even higher. But still, even LQ is such a high file size demand. Just to give you some rough examples, we were shooting a little bit 2 afternoons in Croatia, a little bit of slow motion, and I racked up 500 gigabytes just for a couple minutes of footage. Then we had a commercial job over 2 days, which I also shot in LQ, I believe, and this job amounted to 1.2 terabytes, whereas I shot the exact same job a year ago on 2 Canon C70s and the total footage was less than 120 gigabytes. So that is 10 times as much footage than I was shooting with the Canon cameras. When editing, I use an Apple MacBook Pro M1 Max, and this one is fully spec'd out, and it barely handles the footage of the Red Komodo X. If you only have one stream of 6K footage, put it in a 4K timeline, it's absolutely fine. But that's something I barely ever do. Most of the times I have 2 streams on top of each other. For this YouTube video, for example, there's a roll of me talking and then I show you the B-roll on top of it. And here it even starts to drop frames. And then when you do some type of transitions and some effect works, and then maybe you stack some footage on top of each other, it gets worse and worse, and sometimes I have to lower the quality and the computer can't really handle it anymore. Whereas with my Canon cameras, I could literally stack 10 layers of footage on top of each other and the computer had absolutely no issues with it. Again, if you shoot a narrative project, everything is scripted, or you have a bigger budget project, it's absolutely no big deal, and I always want to have the red raw and the flexibility and all the great image quality. But for certain projects, YouTube, long form documentary, multicam interviews, this is just too much footage, and it's also kind of unnecessary in my opinion. And now to the last category before I give you my final thoughts on the Red Komodo X and the last year I've been shooting with it, is the software and the overall handling of the camera. Working with the Red Komodo X is mostly absolutely amazing because the software inside of the camera is easy to handle, and the fact that you have external camera control on third-party monitors is an absolute game changer. As I briefly mentioned in the beginning, I'm using the Portkeys BM2, and this one does have wireless camera control. So I can change my frame rates, my settings, I can change the ISO as well as all the different functions right from the touchscreen of my monitor. The software sometimes is a little bit clunky, but they just came out with a better version of the new software, which is far better. And you also have small HD as well as the original Red 7-inch monitor, which have absolutely amazing camera control. And just having this option is something that is really unique to Red cameras in my opinion. You also have a really great app where you can change all the settings and have a live feed right from your phone or your iPad or even your computer, I believe. And this is something that is also really unique to Red, I believe. At least the amount of features that you have and how well it actually works. When I was shooting in Croatia the other day, I brought 2 cameras, 7 lenses, multiple V-mount batteries, etc, etc. But the one thing I forgot was the cable to actually power my external monitor. So I didn't have an external monitor at all. So I just hooked up my phone, put it on top of the camera, and I could actually use this to pull focus with, and there was no lag, and that was actually an amazing option that a lot of other cameras just don't have. Another thing I really like about the Red Komodo X, and that was something that I was always missing on all my Canon cameras and the Sony cameras, is anamorphic support, because you have anamorphic modes for all the different de-squeeze factors as well as the different sensor sizes. And this also makes your life so much easier when you shoot a lot of anamorphic footage. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and unicorns. There are some things when it comes to the handling and the software on the Red Komodo X that you don't have with Canon or Sony cameras, and that is the really slow boot up time. It takes about a minute or 45 seconds for the camera to finally boot up. And you also have to just be careful with the SDI protocols. So you have to wait until the camera is fully powered up, until you plug in your external monitor. Then this sometimes takes a little bit. So overall, the camera is just slow to work with. Then you also have to calibrate your sensor a lot of the times and do some black shading when you change different environments and different temperatures. This also can take a lot of time. So overall, the camera just isn't as fast as some other camera manufacturers. But again, this isn't necessarily what this camera was meant for. The file handling overall is also a little bit more complicated. It's just not as easy as just copying over the footage, just hitting the spacebar on your Mac computer and you can see a preview of the file. You need an external software for it, or you need to do it right within your editor. So again, it's a bit slower and there's some extra steps in there. Also, I'm not a fan of how the camera handles slow motion footage because it always detaches the audio file and then you have a separate audio file to your video file. So if you want to film something in 50 frames, for example, or 60 frames, and then you just want to give yourself the option to slow it down later, it detaches the audio, so you need to reattach it or just sync it up in post. So you can't just use whatever 50% of the footage at regular motion and then just only slow down the last part of it and use the audio for the beginning of the shot. At least you can do it easily. So there is some little quirks around this camera that you can immediately tell it's not the best choice for certain types of shootings. And that will also bring me to my final thoughts and my verdict of the Red Komodo X. I want to say overall, I think that the Red Komodo X might be one of the best cameras that I've ever worked with. It just has basically everything that I want and need for certain type of projects. The image is absolutely gorgeous. It just feels amazing to film on a Red camera, and you can just make the camera your own. And that is something that was always very important to me because again, I shoot different kind of projects and different kind of projects have different kind of needs to your equipment and the way you handle your camera. But I've also seen a lot of downsides to the camera. Everything gets expensive quickly. With the ND filters, everything takes up a lot of time. Then there's the huge file sizes, etc, etc. So overall, it really depends on what you're shooting and what the purpose of your camera is. One thing that kind of bugs me with the camera is that I can't really use it for all of my projects. I hardly use it for my YouTube content. I'm not filming myself with it. And a lot of the times when I need something like autofocus, because I just have the camera on a tripod and I'm filming a model demonstrating a lighting tutorial, I can't really rely on the camera. But since I don't have a full-fledged crew with me to shoot all my YouTube videos, I also can't be there to just manually pull focus all the time. So overall, I'm not sure if this is the right camera for me going forward. Again, I'm shooting lots of cool narrative projects, but a lot of them are unpaid because we're doing them for YouTube. And again, the camera is absolutely amazing for it, but I feel like 90% of the times I'm shooting on a Canon R5C, I'm shooting B-roll on it, BTS on it, I'm shooting my A-rolls for YouTube with it, and my very expensive and amazing Red Komodo X just sits on a shelf. Whereas if I had something like a Canon C400, for example, I would just get so much more use out of the camera because I could shoot my talking heads with it. I can use it for some B-roll where I'm just shooting by myself and I need the autofocus for it. And overall, I think I just would get more for the money. So I will think about it. Again, I still have a couple weeks. If I were to shoot narrative projects and just bigger projects and even medium to higher budget commercials, the Red Komodo X is the way to go and it's the best camera that I've ever used. For the use case that I'm doing, I'm not sure yet. Overall, I hope you liked my thoughts on the Red Komodo X, having used it for the past year. And if you did, then please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more because there will be more narrative projects, lighting breakdowns where we use the Red Komodo X. And make sure to check out Skillshare with the link down in the description below.